What's the basis for doing it? Because we want to welcome the ETs, we want to get all ready for them so we can hold them a big party? No, because there's a In order to end the truth embargo, they're having to go through a fairly elaborate process in order to do it in a way that they view as constructive. And I happen to agree with them. Not only constructive, but also less disruptive. And as it happens, also make the government look a little better, as I've talked about many times. In other words, hey, if we're going to do this, let's don't, make us look any worse than we already are, right? So they're trying to effectuate something that's very difficult, and as a result, and it's also been delayed. What they've been trying to do should have been done long ago. It could have happened much quicker. Unfortunately, we entered an era of interesting times, and we all know what that means. So that has stretched it out, and by stretching it out, it has really made it harder for them, because a lot of the things they're doing should have just moved on into the next level, the next stage, and get to disclosure. But instead, they're kind of stuck, and that makes them a sitting target. And so Arrow's an example. Arrow is just sitting there, and it's just an absolute target. And people just, it's not even fair. I mean, it's just sitting there, and they're just shooting it every day. I get that, but they don't understand what Arrow's about. Those Olympic events, the 800, the 1600, whatever the hell dash. You go around the track about 4 or 5 times. You can tell I'm not a track guy. But in the last lap, as you get around to the last lap, they fire off a gun, signaling last lap. Okay. All right. So let's look at the disclosure thing this way. Right. The gun went off on the last lap of the truth embargo, 2017, December, with the New York Times articles. What led up to that was important, and no question about it. And some of that is known. We know a lot about it, but not everything. But ultimately, some major stories are delivered to the Times. It was written up by Leslie Kean, Ralph Blumenthal, and Helene Cooper. Put on the front page of 2 consecutive print editions, whatever those are, but it all went up on the internet, including some gun camera footage. First time ever released formally by any government, and this was released by our DOD, which definitely caught people's attention. And those clips have been seen several billion times since then. When that article hit the New York Times, the gun went off on the last lap. And it was just a question of how long it was going to take to make that lap, cross the finish line, and have disclosure. So with that in mind, I invite people to just shut out of their mind all of their conspiracy thinking and explanations that they think they've got, and who they like and who they don't like, and how much they hate the U.S. government or love it. It doesn't matter. Just put all that aside, and I'm just going to paint the picture of what happened so that hopefully you can get a sense that, wait a minute, yeah, that makes sense. That's what's going down. Okay, so the gun goes off, which means that the idea of ending this truth embargo is now in play. There's no question about it. There's clearly quite a few people in government who have made that decision. 10 people came out on their own in a public setting, in an organization called To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science and so forth, and then started speaking on podcasts and what have you, and got the ball rolling on the public side, but also behind the scenes, meaning meetings, briefings, getting together, talking, all that kind of good stuff that happens in order to govern. The leader of the behind the scenes stuff, as far as I could tell, was Christopher Mellon. He had the background for it. He was perfect for the job. And so the gun goes off. It's 2017. And then a whole bunch of things started happening. And all of these things were being done in order to create the basis to disclose, to build the structure so that disclosure could take place. And the best analogy I have for that, it's not great, but it's all right, it's not too bad, is every 4 years, we have to swear in a new president. Don't we enjoy that? And in order to do that in the right way, it needs to be public and transparent and fairly official and kind of nicely done. They go to a lot of trouble to build a huge scaffolding on the west side of the White House. Massive, huge, just fills up the whole area. And once they get it all done, everybody comes, they sit, a bunch of pageantry, and there's flags and things. And then the president comes up on the platform with the Supreme Court justice, got the Bible, puts his hand on it or her hand on it one day, and takes the oath and becomes president. And then when they get done, they take the scaffolding down. But that scaffolding is important. That whole ceremony is important. If you don't do that, if you just have them take the oath in the cafeteria under, in the basement of the White House, and then just wave, out the window later that day, people are not going to like that. It's going to be destructive. It's not going to be a confidence builder. It's got to be done right. There's a lot of things in running a massive country and maintaining the proper relationship between the government and the people. It have to be done right. And that includes disclosure, particularly when disclosure is essentially the formal acknowledgement that we've been lying through our teeth for 77 years. Oh, have we lied? Big time, right? That makes it even tougher. And so what they had to do was to build the structure and create the basis for disclosure to take place. Is what we want. And as you know, I've gone to great length to very clearly define it. Capital D, confirmation from the president. That's it. Nothing else. You want to call it something else, that's your business. It's not, some lieutenant colonel drinking too much and screaming out, there's ETs here at a cocktail party. That's not disclosure. It has to be from the president for a whole host of reasons. Most people understand this. It's not that complicated. And so it's all about creating the basis for that and doing it in a way that is, in fact, constructive, appropriate, not just for the people, but for the institutions of government and our military and so forth. In other words, you could do disclosure in a way that trashes everybody, right? Everybody gets screwed. Everybody's thrown under the bus. It's a massacre. And then you end up with disclosure. You go, well, we've got disclosure now, but boy, things are a mess here. No. You want to do it in a way that is constructive, not disruptive, that is that serves the people, it's transparent, and hopefully improves the ability of people, once they get the truth, to be generous with their government over the fact that they've been lying for so long. That is what they are trying to do, and they're doing exactly what I expected them to do. And what is that? Well, first of all, the issue comes alive. The New York Times did that. It was already quite alive, but in the age of podcast and social media and so forth, it doesn't take much for things to get really going. And so it's moving forward. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, meetings. Usually always starts with meetings. People go up on the Hill, they talk privately to members of Congress and say, here's what's going on. I want you to kind of know about it. Bring some witnesses up. Some we know, some we don't. Would you like to talk to this airline pilot? This Navy pilot, this ship commander, whatever. And they get private briefings about things that we'll eventually learn about much later. And these briefings are important because one of the most essential things for this to be done right is they have to have legislation. In other words, the Congress has got to be involved. This will be one of the biggest events in history. It's going to affect every living person on the planet, including everybody in the United States and institutions and so forth. And so the idea you're going to do it and then, we'll figure out later. No, you have to start creating a legislative infrastructure underneath what is coming. And the first thing you do is brief the Congress privately. And when enough of them have been briefed, accompanied with other developments in the public sector, that's always happening, and they've been speeding up. At some point, Congress is going to decide, okay, it's time for us to finally step into this. When Stephen Schiff, congressman from New Mexico, tried to just get some records from the GAO about Roswell, and they basically said, oh no, they're over at the archives. And the archives said, no, the Navy has them. And the Navy said, we lost them. I think at one point they were told a bunch of them were burned up in a fire. he got really angry, and he went on I think, a couple of major shows complaining about the fact that they were giving him the runaround, and nothing came from it. Right? That's not engaging the issue legislatively. Right. And there have been a few other of those vignettes, but that's not the same thing. And so, not surprisingly, it began. It began with the Senate Intel Committee, which is the right committee for it to begin. And it began with Marco Rubio, a man who had run for president, pretty prominent guy, co-chair of the Intel Committee, which really works as like a partnership. The chairman and the ranking member pretty much almost equal. A lot of respect there. They tend to get along in the Intel Committee. God bless them. And so Rubio puts together some significant legislation for to be passed in the 2021 NDA. That bill, the NDA that year, 2020, was part of the pandemic omnibus bill, COVID bill, whatever, don't care. Thing is that language was in there that set up the UAP task force and a number of other things, but mostly it just began. In other words, a major politician, ranking member of the Intel Committee, has taken the risk to put legislation into the NDA bill about this subject. And that just rang a bell all around the U.S. government. I can assure you, if they didn't know what's going on, they looked up from their desks and said, ooh, that's interesting. And fine, we got that legislation. And then there were more developments next year. Things were moving along. Unfortunately, one of the things moving along was the COVID virus. All right. And so the pace of things following that rather extraordinary thing of that legislation was pretty much diminished and slowed down. What can you do? But no problem, because in the next bill, right, the 2022 NDAA, more language appeared. And this was shepherded by a Democratic member of the Intel Committee, Kirsten Gillibrand, very significant woman who also ran for president. And she puts in some significant language in that bill. And of course, you can go online and find these bills. But one of the things I'm going to be doing very soon, could be even later tonight, I think, stay awake, is I'm taking the language, all the UAP language in each of these bills, putting it into a PDF single space kind of standard format where you can read it real easy. And then I'm going to highlight in red the cool stuff. And I'll put that up so you can literally get it off the internet and look at it. And then as I continue to work with it and highlight, I'll just keep reloading it. So I'm going to do that pretty soon. So that bill went down. And then more things started happening. Throughout those 2 years, the briefing on the Hill continued. Not to mention the fact that the first bill and the second bill called for certain reports from the government. Certain time frame, X amount of months, you got to give us a report. And the government, the DOD rather did. I meant the DOD. The DOD did come through with those, public and classified. And so in that 2 years, the Congress is getting some classified reports from the DOD under the legislation, as well as talking to more witnesses, briefings, private, up on the Hill, and learning more and more. In other words, the Congress is going through a substantial learning curve. And by Congress, I don't mean every member of Congress, every committee, but the ones that are very relevant. The Intel committees, the Armed Services Committee, possibly Homeland Security, right? Armed Forces. But that's a lot of members. And then, the way Capitol Hill works is that you may be briefing this group over here, but they all kind of meet for lunch in the cafeterias in the basement, and stuff gets around. And it's a giant gossip mill up there. And so let me tell you, the Congress is filling up with information relevant and important with respect to the UAP issue. And it's passing legislation. It's exactly what we wanted. In the third year, right, things got interesting because Mark Warner stepped in. Now, he's another Democrat. He's a Democrat like Gillibrand, but he's also the chairman of the committee. And he put some language out. Very substantial bill. And the thing that many people remember is that this language was particularly known for the fact that it included, amongst many other things, these are substantial bills, protection for witnesses, not necessarily whistleblowers per se, but protection for witnesses, that if you're providing information as per the legislation, as what we want to the entity that we're setting up in the DOD, which had 4 or 5 different names, and anybody gives you grief about it, that's against the law, and they're going to have a problem. That was significant that he did that, put that language in. But it got even better because there was a paragraph following that part that said something that absolutely stunned me, that it was in there at all. It was a paragraph that followed that if you are harassed in that way, and they're violating what we are describing as inappropriate behavior because you're doing what we ask you to do, you can sue them. You can sue your boss, right, for damages and punishment. And you could even sue the government. And I'm saying, I don't believe that. That's impossible because the government doesn't want you to sue them. They go to tremendous lengths to avoid that. Well, guess what? When the reconciliation took place and the bill was combined with the House and it finally got signed by the president, that paragraph was taken out. And people say, well, you see, right? It's a game. They're playing us like fools. No. There was no chance that paragraph was going to stay in. However, for many, many months, it sat up on the Senate website as pending legislation language for everybody in the world to read. Everybody in the Air Force and the Navy, everybody over at the CIA, people working in underground facilities somewhere in the West, everybody who could get to the net could go up and read that bill. And believe me, plenty did. It's a pretty big deal. And they saw that paragraph and they said, whoa, if that were to pass, that's going to get a little dicey. It didn't pass, but the message was sent. And so we continue on. Now, during this time frame, because one of the things I do, even though it's driving me nuts, is to track all this in some logical way. And so I monitor the media extensively. And on my website, I have a print media archive, which if I could share it, I would, but it's now up to 15,000 articles. But in the last 5 years, since the gun went off on this final lap, I think I have logged in something like 4,000 articles, all about the UAP, ET, and disclosure process. And those 4,000 are triaged from probably 8,000 articles, which are just not important. They're fringe press. It's not that high end, maybe paranormal, whatever, just some website. No, only legitimate professional journalism. 4,000 articles. So all of that is happening, which is appropriate, right? Because it's letting the people in. It's telling them what's going on. It's part of the transparency. Meanwhile, documentaries are coming out like crazy. In the middle of this, Bad Robot, which is run by one of the biggest shots in all of Los Angeles and Hollywood, J.J. Abrams, decides to do a 4-part UFO series, right? There's projects been going on for a couple of years now all over Los Angeles in the film industry related to this issue. They're on board, and they're coming on board fast. And I'm just going to tease you right now because on November the 2nd, a very significant announcement is coming out of Hollywood that relates to exactly what I'm saying. And I'll be telling you a lot more about that in the distant future, not distant future, in the near future. So all that's happening. And this is great. This is exactly what you want. And now these legislations are doing other things than just providing reports. One of the things that legislation had to do was to create a formal office in the Department of Defense to deal with the issue. They started out with the UAP task force, and then they went on to something else as they're trying to adapt to the legislation and what they're learning. They started with unidentified aerial phenomena, but then they learned that we all know about the unidentified submerged objects, USOs. And somebody pointed out to them, they can fly in space. And so they said, we got to change this. So they went to unidentified anomalous phenomena. That's fine. They were adjusting and adapting. It took a couple years, but they finally landed on the final project. The final program is called the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO, right? And that name perfectly reflects what is true and where we have to go. This issue is about phenomena that is in space, in the air, under the ocean, and frankly, it can even be under the ground. And there's more about the phenomena than just things flying around. And so that covers it all. And a lot of people, the ones that really just don't want to believe anything the government does, doesn't trust anything the government says or does, the last thing is resolution office. In other words, they're saying it's all about all domain anomalies, and we're going to resolve them. Okay. Now, what resolve means, we can discuss, but that is the name, and that is a non-trivial name. So that was set up. And then, of course, appropriately, they had some briefings on the Hill. This is what you do when you're creating some new major thing. And so the committees brought a couple of the people up, like Moultrie and Bray, and asked them, that wasn't a hearing, a briefing, and said, what's going on, guys? Andre Carson did something similar. Just checking in, briefings, whatever. This is what you expect. But every one of those is being seen by the public, which is to say that they are seeing the scaffolding being built. They're seeing the structure slowly being formed. Whether they like it or don't like it, whether they hate the government or don't hate it, the structure is being formed. And much more happens in this field. Sightings have skyrocketed. More journalism is pouring in. Articles in every major publication, every major magazine. And if you were to review those articles, the 4,000 I'm talking about, particularly the 1,500 this year, it'll probably get to 1,900 by the end of the year. It's the largest article, how would you say, group ever done on the subject in any single year. What they will find out is two interesting things. One, we went to great lengths. We went to great lengths to try to inculcate the concept of UAP into the discussion to replace UFO. And we had to do that because UFO had been just destroyed, riddled, right? Covered with grease, bastardized, you name it, as part of the truth embargo. In other words, assign a name, something that is central to the whole damn thing. Just undermine the hell out of that name, and therefore you taint everything connected to it. It's so simple, so easy. And so if you're in the field, how do you go to a conference or write a book without saying UFO? That was the name. And the moment you say UFO, you're crazy. You're a tinfoil hat person. Yeah, you got a PhD, maybe you're an astronaut, but you said UFO. So it was totally corrupted by the government, not by us. And so if we wanted to build this infrastructure, if we wanted to get all of these players in, the Congress and this and that and everything else, UFO was a problem. And so we went with UAP, and we finally really got it going. We did. And Hillary Clinton, God bless her, was kind of the touchstone moment when she was on Jimmy Kimmel's show, and he brought up the issue to her as others had to her husband and John Podesta. And I actually have a lot of responsibility there. It's a long story, but let's just say that I was kind of behind the scenes. And the point is, and then her answer was, "Oh, Jimmy, there's a new term now. It's UAP, unidentified aerial phenomena." It was important because for the journalists and the politicians who are very skittish to get into this issue seriously, UFO is a problem, but UAP, no problem. And so on we go. Now, the point I'm trying to make is this. The legislation has nothing but UAP in it. I think UFO turns up once or twice, and it's mostly as a definition, right? That's what we mean. If you hear that, it was UAP, UAP, UAP. And it was unexplained aerial phenomena, then it became unexplained anomalous phenomena, whatever. But here's the cool thing. The stigma on this issue has collapsed so far. UFO came back. It came back. We vanquished this thing, right? And it came back, and now it's being used everywhere, and nobody cares. So what comes next is the fourth tranche of legislation, which is now waiting to be reconciled. The Aero office is complete. It's had some funding. Also, what had to be done was briefings. A lot of witnesses have been briefed by the Intel committee staff as well as by Aero. That was important. So that's all done. Okay. And so we needed one more major piece of legislation to finish the scaffolding before the big show, the big event. And that is this year. Now, this gets really interesting, right? Because there were some surprises here that just spiced it up. and just attracted even more attention, but at the same time put a lot of pressure on finishing this lap. It's kind of like that, that runner that's, back behind maybe 8th place, and suddenly as they're approaching, they start running real fast. Well, we're having to do that, and there's a reason for that. So essentially what happened was we're waiting on the Senate legislation for the 2024 NDA bill, which will be the 4th consecutive year of legislation on the UAP issue. And I don't want to beat this to death, but prior to that, there had never been a single sentence of legislation on this issue. And so people that are thinking, it's all the same. It's the same thing. I'm going, please, people, come on. So we're waiting on that. And then something odd happens. What we call a black swan event. Unexpected, but not surprising. And it was because, as I mentioned before, circumstances in the world, it's been a rather interesting 7 years, circumstances in the world have really slowed down the ability to get this done, because it's not the only thing on the menu, and the menu is filling up all the time, and it's been some really awful things happening, and it's delayed it. And because it's delayed it, it's opened it up to the unpredictable. In other words, you want to get it done, out the door, and home free. You don't want to leave any time for something odd to happen. Well, something did. And I'll be really short. Of the many people involved in this issue internally, and there are a lot, one of them was named David Grush, and he was working for the UAP task force. And his job was to get information and receive information, and that's exactly what happened. No problem. And then his job was to pass that on as appropriate with respect to the bills that were passed, which he did. No problem. Except that some people were thinking, we're not really crazy about this. And so let's kind of just drag our feet here. Don't go talk to them about that. Don't bring that up. Just kind of stay put. Well, that wasn't his job. In other words, they were harassing him, and they made him mad. He was a former intel officer, Air Force, a couple of tours in Iraq. And there's other people like him that I know about over these years. And these are not the kind of people that you try to intimidate. Wrong guys. All right. So he wasn't liking it. And so he took his complaints literally to the IG, Inspector General's office of the intelligence community. And his complaint was so righteous that the former and first IG of the intelligence community, a gentleman named McCullough, represented him. Okay. That's like taking a case before the Supreme Court, and the person representing you is a former Supreme Court justice, right? And so he got relief. They acknowledged it was a valid concern, and whoever was bothering him, by and large, back at home base, left him alone. Unfortunately, that's not enough, because if you want to harass somebody, you don't have to do it in your name. You don't have to do it in the open. There's 1,000 ways to drive people crazy completely anonymously. And so he kept getting harassed and threatened, including his family. Meanwhile, he had given the information to important people, I believe the Intel Committee. He also went to Arrow. And for reasons I'll explain later, Arrow had no interest in doing anything with that, because what he had to say was pretty intense. And that irritated him. And he finally made an historical and fateful decision. One of the most important decisions anybody in our government has ever made. He's up there. Guy's going to have some serious historical attention. He said, enough is enough. I'm going to be a whistleblower. I'm going to get some journalists. I'm going to give them the information that I have, that I gave to the Intel Committee and others. I'm even going to give an interview and put it all out there. And more importantly, I'm going to make the claim, which I believe he justly feels, he's not alone in that regard, that the whole process of hiding all this stuff and the programs they're doing is illegal in some form or fashion. And therefore, I'm a whistleblower. And he called himself that. And that makes him a whistleblower. There are plenty of witnesses out there that are not whistleblowers, that are being called whistleblowers. Don't do that. And so this whistleblower comes forward. Okay. What's he got? Anything interesting? Well, on June the 5th, when I woke up that morning, the debrief article written by Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal was already out, and people had read it, and their hair was on fire. They were running around, crazy. Steve, have you heard? And finally, I found that up in the article. I said, oh, wow. And then we learned that he was going to do his interview that same day. And so hundreds of us that were left the last day of the Contact in the Desert conference last June, last day was June the 5th, we all gathered in this room and watched together. All of us are in this bit, all in the UAP business, all the people that came to the conference were still there. So it's like a nice family group. And we watched him being interviewed by Ross Coulthart, one of my absolute favorite journalists, in which he said everything that was in the article. And what did he say? Multiple people inside USAPs and supported by other individuals that I conferred with have made it quite clear that we have multiple non-human vehicles in our facilities than we have been studying and re-engineering. And we also have the pilots, the dead bodies of the pilots of those craft. And that was not supposed to happen. The thing was moving along quite nicely, but it was moving along too slow. And so the Senate and the House and the White House and everybody else was not ready to have that dropped in to the picture, but there it was. Whoa. So that's June 5. All right. And so what happens next takes 39 days. Tons of articles, right? Go read them on my website, paradigmresearchgroup.org, print media archive. Articles are pouring forth about David Grush. Of course they are. And so what are you going to do? I mean, if you're the Intel committee, you didn't want this out. That was supposed to come out in hearings before the Intel committee under oath, not as a whistleblower report to Ross Coulthart. Nothing against Ross. This just wasn't in the plan. Hey, it's messy and they've taken too long. And so after 39 days, something very dramatic happens. Most people, I don't know how many people know this, but if they don't know it, pay attention, folks, because this is really big. Out of nowhere, Chuck Schumer, who's not a formal member of the Intel committee, though as the Senate majority leader, maybe he has a right to sit on it anytime he wants to, or any other committee, as far as I know, in the Senate, but whatever. He's not one of the regular members. He publicly comes out as the Senate majority leader and says, I am putting some language into this next legislation, this NDAA. Oh, all right, Chuck, great. What do you got? Well, what he had was this. He put and did put language, which in so many words, and I can get into the bill if we have time, that effective when this bill is passed, everyone should know, again, I'm paraphrasing it because any non-human tech that any American or American company, whether they're in the U.S. or outside the U.S., they're American company or American citizen who happens to have some non-human technology or any non-human bodies, other intelligent bodies, it belongs to us. It belongs to the United States. Eminent domain. Period. Now, who is he targeting? He may be targeting somebody that actually got a piece of Roswell records and had in their basement for 70 some years. Maybe. He may be targeting somebody that, he could, most importantly, is he targeting the people that are working in the deepest USAP programs on this? You bet he is. Is he targeting all the government contractors like Lockheed Martin that we're pretty certain have been contracted to work on some of this tech? You bet he is. Is he targeting some Lockheed Martin scientists that kind of took a piece with him one day, took it home and said, look, I can work with this later. And I'm going to build a startup company around that. And my whole family's going to live well. All of them. And he just didn't say that. It wasn't just, if you got it, understand, we own it. He then includes language that says 300 years, and the number of years 300 days doesn't matter. And I'll tell you why in a bit. But 300 days from the signing of this bill, we want you to report back to us through the proper channels everything you got. And so if you're Lockheed Martin and you've got 3 crash vehicles in one of your underground research facilities just working away, and maybe even have one of them working, you're supposed to make a report about that and send it through to the United States government. Now, a lot of people go, it won't happen. It's just a ruse. Oh, come on, folks. Really? So that message has now gone out, and that went out on July the 14th, everywhere. So remember that language I said that was in the earlier bill that didn't make it in, the language about you can sue the government if you're harassed over this issue? It didn't pass into the bill, but the message went out. So this has been up on the site now for months, and it'll remain up on the site until the bill's signed, until the bill's reconciled in mid-December. And so the message has gone out. Even if this doesn't make it into the bill, where I'm at is one of the most powerful men in the Congress, and one of the gang of 8. This is unprecedented. This is just, in 1960, if you told somebody that was, writing books about UAPs, this is going to happen, they laughed at you. They thought you were nuts. All right, this has happened. And so that bill, when you read the whole thing, and it's 63 pages in legal format, and it's 28 single-space pages, 26 single-space pages in the PDF that I'm going to put up on my website afterwards. It is the last piece of the puzzle. It covers a lot of things. It has a legacy program in there that's dealing with all information related to this phenomena that's more than 25 years old. It's got a controlled disclosure plan that is basically a controlled way to show how the stuff that's in the secret programs and everything else can work its way forward and through and be checked over and then advance forward, with the intention that all of it eventually ends up in the National Archives. Okay, it's got that and more. And when you read the whole bill, and if you know pretty much the whole story, what you know now is that the scaffolding has been built. It's done. They don't need to do anything else. In fact, this last bill also talks about some money for Arrow, which really hasn't had much money, right? So that's in there as well. Okay, so at the scaffolding's built, and now we're all set. What is supposed to happen next? The last piece, and that is the Intel hearing, the Senate Intel hearing, where we know the witnesses who are almost certainly going to turn up, right? And these witnesses will absolutely rock the world. Not that they're not known, not that they haven't turned up here and there, but they've simply been dismissed. The government won't acknowledge them, won't deal with them, and the Congress doesn't deal with them. But when they turn up in front of the most powerful committee in Congress, and they take an oath, many of them are military, they've already taken an oath, and they tell their truth with hundreds of millions of people watching, that is a different matter altogether. So they're going to bring in the first-hand witnesses, okay, and more. They can have all the pilots they want. If they want, they could spend an entire day showing just gotten gun camera footage, the good stuff, the really clear stuff, 8, 9, 20, 30 minutes. They could show gun camera footage all friggin' day. Just put it up on the screen. Let the public around the world see. They have enough to blow this thing completely out of the water. And when they have done that, take about a week, they will have created a situation where finally, with minimal disruption, zero partisanship, without causing too much trouble for the White House, the president can come forward in the East Room of the White House and say, Friday night probably, I've been watching this testimony. I have been following these developments for some time. I've been talking to the appropriate people, and I think I can confirm to you we're not alone. There's non-human tech here. There's non-humans here, and you want to know a lot more about it, and I am your president, and I'm going to see that you learn a lot more about it. And when he says those words, we are at that moment in the post-capital D disclosure world. The biggest paradigm and shift in history will have taken place. And then here's the punchline. And the reason why all of this stuff is being done, and the reason why people are so, I don't know, confused and angry about it. When those words are spoken, everything that has been put together, Arrow, witness interviews, right, the legislation, legacy programs, disclosure plan, all of that stuff, not to mention the massive awareness of the public and the journalist, immediately becomes 100% in play. In other words, we will be perfectly ready to deal with a world that is going to come at all the governments. And every government has to do something like this, though we're ahead of the game and wants to know everything right away with a billion questions. But it's okay. We have legislation. We've got Arrow. We're ready to deal with it. Now, imagine if somehow the president, maybe because of a mass sighting or something, was forced to come out suddenly and say, yes, we got ETs here on television. And none of this was done. No legislation, no briefings of the Congress, not that media coverage. None of this was done. All of this would have to then be put together in the post-disclosure chaos that would be ensuing. And that would not be a good idea. And so, to wrap up this little tirade, what people don't get is all of this you've been seeing put together, unfortunately too slowly for 5 years now, 6 years, is not about finally figuring out what's going on because, oh my God, there's something going on up there. I think we need to do this and do that and find out what it is. They know what's going on. The number of people in our government, either because they're involved or simply know that there's an ET presence and we have technology, would probably fill up a football stadium, maybe 5 of them, right? But they don't speak about it because it's not appropriate or illegal and they want to keep their job. They know already. And so the reason they're putting it together is for after they confirm it to have it in place. But the problem that they face and the problem the public faces is this. In order to put it together, in order to get the journalists to cover it, in order to get the politicians to take those meetings and even put some legislation together and so forth, they had to couch it in terms that would be comfortable. In other words, they had to stay within the certain lines. Like a runner trying to make a touchdown, running from one end zone to the other. And they can juke and jive and run and everything else, but do they step out of bounds 2 inches, the play is over. Ball's dead. And so they have to do it in a certain way. UFO was not helpful. UAP was helpful, right? What's the basis for doing it? Because we want to welcome the ETs, want to get all ready for them so we can hold them a big party? No, because there's a potential threat. Not a threat, but a potential threat, a legitimate national security matter. And if you're a politician and you're going to gauge the UAP issue and you're afraid of losing most of your voting support, it's nice to be able to come out and say, look, I'm looking at this because there is a legitimate national security issue here. And so we're going to look at it. Some people get a little careless and they talk about threat. It's mostly potential threat. All of that is to make it palatable to go forward. Does that mean that there's going to be a contactee caucus in the House at some time? No. Does that mean contactees are going to be brought in for a big interview? No. That is later. That is post-disclosure. And there's a whole lot of other aspects of this issue that'll be post-disclosure. And so as they work their way through this, being careful, people are tearing their hair out going, are you kidding me? You know damn well that's not true. You already know this. And that's where they get upset.